Hello and welcome to episode number 149, where I speak with Ayurvedic Doctor Victor Briere about the role of Agni, that fire energy in the body, and in particular about the Dhatu Agnis, that fire energy in the tissues, and the relationship between the Agnis and healing the body, and also the relationship to consciousness. So please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, health and wellness, nutrition, fitness, and mindfulness practices, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to help you to connect to each other. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend that you start by listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. Now, if you like the content, please subscribe to the show so the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at the Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now, here's the show. Hello and welcome back to Elements of Ayurveda, and today I'm very happy to have a reoccurring guest, Dr. Victor Briere, who has an Ayurvedic practice in Walla, Northern California called Pacific Coast Ayurveda. And Dr. Briere, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Great. Well, today the topic is Dhatu Agnis, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because a lot of the focus is put on the main digestive Agni, but what you're going to talk about today is how it really is about the Agni throughout the body. And so I'd like for you to take it away and maybe start with the basics, like what is the Agni, and start there and then take us on this journey, and let's get in depth into the Agni or the digestive fires.
Okay, great. We're going to go on as deep of a dive as we can.
Great.
Because this is a pretty sophisticated and subtle topic, but it's really essential to Ayurveda, and it's a way of looking at our bodies that we don't run across in our day-to-day. Mm-hmm. So to start at the very top of the dive, on the diving board, so to speak, before we jump in, we should talk about two things, Agni and Dhatu. So Agni in Ayurveda, I'm sure on people who listen to your show regularly have heard it a million times, but maybe there are a few people tuning in for the first time. So Agni, A-G-N-I, is the quality that everyone possesses and is possessed in nature, the ability to transform one thing into another thing. And of course, we can easily make the jump between that and digestion, right? So we put food inside our body, and then the Agni inside our body transforms that food into our tissues in all its subtle ways. Mm-hmm. And then Dhatu, which is spelled D-H-A-T-U, is a tissue. It's just a word for tissue. But Ayurveda has a very specific way of categorizing those dhatus. And the primary dhatus in order are rasa, which is blood plasma, rakta, which is blood, what we think of as red blood, mamsa, which is muscle tissue. But really, mamsa is the stuff that makes up muscle tissue because other things are categorized as mamsa as well. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, membranes are mamsa dhatu. And, like if you take the actual lining or substance that your stomach is made out of, or that your intestines are made out of, that flesh, that's mamsa dhatu. Mm-hmm. So then we go to meta, which is fat, and then asti, which is bone, and then maja, which is bone marrow, but also creates nerve tissue. And then finally, we get to shukra and artava. Shukra is male reproductive tissue, and artava is female reproductive tissue. And those are the 7 primary dhatus. But you might be thinking, well, hey, what about the other stuff like tendons and ligaments and things like that? And of course, those are addressed in Ayurveda, but they're considered upshots of those primary dhatus. So, for example, ligaments and tendons are upshots of Rakta Dhatu. And so if you're having blood-related issues, you may also find that you have tendon-related issues. And so it goes on like that, and there are a whole bunch of those sub-tissues and then waste products of tissues that create other tissues. Like, for example, hair and nails are waste products of bone tissue, Asti Dhatu. So if you're having bone issues, you might also experience having hair loss, for example. And we can go through all the tissues like that, and at the end of the day, you'll have a complete description of everything going on inside your body from a Dhatu perspective.
Right.
So,
now, can I interrupt here just real quick? Because I just want to let people know, if you're not familiar with the Dhatus and you're kind of going, what? That I have an episode that I previously did going in depth on the Dhatus, which we're not really going to do today. That's number 92, and I'll link it in the show notes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely. Because we get crazy with these Sanskrit terms and all that stuff. So it's good to think of the Dhatus simply as the different types of tissues you have in your body. That makes it easy for us to grasp. So then there's a huge relationship between Agni and Dhatu, because your Dhatu and the quality of your Dhatus and how well refined your Dhatus are and how well they function, your tissues, is 100% dependent on the quality of your Agni. And the typical way we think of Agni is digestion. That's the word, that's kind of the parallel that we use when we're talking about Agni. If someone were to come into my clinic and they say, what's Agni? And I say, it's your ability to digest. And typically, when we start out, we just talk about the main Agni. The main Agni is seated in the small intestine and stomach, and that's the core of your digestive power. So you have this little flame. Agni means fire. That's what it means in Sanskrit. And so you got this flame inside you. And I always like to clarify, because some people get caught up on the fact that Ayurveda is an elemental medicine, meaning that it talks about things in terms of fire, water, ether, air, and earth. And that can be confusing to some people, because it's like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, that seems kind of a little bit out of the box, or, too rudimentary to really describe a system or a body, something as complex as our body. But what I like to always express or impart is that it's not so much the element itself, like we're not really talking about earth like dirt. We're talking about the qualities that those elements possess. So in that way, the element becomes a metaphor for a function inside our body. And how beautiful is that? Because we can observe this kind of essence in nature like fire. And then it becomes a direct metaphor for what the function of how our body really runs. That's more profound than we like to give it credit for. Because what that does is it creates this unbreakable link between ourselves and the natural world. And that's something that we'll get into later when we talk more in this episode. But that's something that plays a big role in how we're living in nature right now, with everything going on. But so we'll stick with Agni, because that's the element we're dealing with, the fire element. And when you look at the qualities of fire, you basically, if you were to observe fire, you get a really great picture of how digestion works. You get a flame, and let's say you start with a small flame and you kindle a fire. And so you start off with the food for the fire, and it's, some branches and leaves and twigs and things like that. And the fire starts to consume that substance. And then in that consumption, it transforms it into its next form, or it breaks it down into its constituent components. And then obviously it gets released into the air, and that's the end of the fire for us. But inside our body, it acts the same way. So we have this fiery quality inside our stomach and small intestine, where most of our initial digestion happens. And we put something in, like an apple, and then that acidic, fiery quality breaks it down just like a fire would break down leaves or twigs into its constituent components. And then those start traveling through our intestines and get absorbed into our bloodstream. And then, but what does our body do with those constituent components? That's the big question of the day. That is the whole philosophy and ideology and reality of the Dhatu Agnis, the tissue fires. Because what a lot of people don't think about on a day-to-day basis is that if they have some kind of digestive ailment, they think, oh, my stomach hurts, or oh, my abdomen hurts, or something like that. But that's just the beginning of digestion in the body. Really, there's a digestive process that happens in between all those tissues that we listed out earlier. So your body digests blood plasma to blood, from blood to muscle, from muscle to fat, from fat to bone, bone to nervous tissue, from nervous tissue to reproductive tissue. In between all those tissues, 7 in total, there is an Agni, a digestion process. And if you want to create a parallel to our modern, to more allopathic medicine, then that looks like, cellular nutrition or something like that. Where, your bone cells are different from your muscle cells. And they each need nutrition, and they each need specific constituents that your main Agni created by breaking down the food you brought in. And so they, raise their hand and say, I need this, or I need that. I need this particle, or I need that particle. And they're different for each Dhatu. They have different demands and different proportions. So bones need calcium more than muscles do, right? And muscles need protein more than bones do. And so we get this extremely sophisticated, like, logistical system in our body where all the right things have to go to the right places at the right times. And not only that, they then have to be transformed in the right way to build the right tissue that's appropriate so that we can run around and do what we do every day. So that's a lot, and that's a big chunk, and we got to digest that in our minds. And that's exactly how Ayurveda talks about that too, is that when anything incoming, even information, needs to be digested.
Yeah, so it's not only, of course, we're thinking of food, but it's also about thinking of our thoughts need to be transformed and digested, and sensations, whatever we're taking in through our senses.
Yes, and the important part of that is that is all entirely linked to our physiology. So there is no separation between a perception coming in and the physiological effect it has on our system. There's no such thing as just a mental disease. That doesn't exist in Ayurveda. The mind and the body are one entity, and they're all functioning with the same primordial forces like Agni. So Agni in the stomach has an effect on mental Agni. And Agni in the stomach has an effect on the Agni that exists inside every little piece of bone tissue. And so on and so forth. So if someone says, I don't have any digestive issues, and they're just thinking of their stomach and small intestine, that may not be strictly speaking the truth. They may have a big issue digesting with their, we'll stick with bone, they may have a big issue digesting bone constituents. So the Dhatu Agni for Asti, which is bone tissue, that Dhatu Agni may be malfunctioning. Mm-hmm. And if that's malfunctioning, then they're not going to be able to build bone tissue well.
Right.
And then that's going to show up in their body.
Right.
And so in that light, we can say that osteoporosis is a digestive issue. Mm-hmm. And if you really wanted to trace it all the way back, you could trace it all the way back to the stomach and small intestine, but oftentimes you don't have to. And the main purpose of this is to start getting people to have a different idea of what digestion is and how it works.
Right, right. And essentially Agni is like the governing principle in our body, but we're just breaking it down so that it is easier to understand. But, you know, Agni is prolific throughout our body, in our tissues and so on, but we're breaking it down into these different parts so we can understand the process more.
Right. We're in this episode, we're doing what Agni does to Agni.
Right.
We're breaking it down.
Right, right.
So that we can better understand it.
So I'm jumping in here with something that could really help improve your Agni, your digestive fires throughout your body, and that's cleansing. Ayurveda highly recommends regular cleansing, and I have a group discounted cleanse starting September 18th, 2020. This online group cleanse is individually tailored to you. So you receive a 90-minute online consult with me where I tailor the recipes, the yoga videos, the meditation, the pranayam, the self-care practices, and the daily routines to your needs and to your lifestyle. This cleanse will help you to improve your Agni, the digestive fires in the body. It will help you to eliminate toxins. It will boost your immune system, something we're very aware of right now. It will help you maintain a healthy body weight for your constitution. It will give you mental clarity and improved awareness. It will calm your nervous system. It will improve your sleep, and you will feel rejuvenated and restored, pacifying your doshas, giving you clarity, energy, and vitality. So if you're interested in joining this at-home cleanse, please check out the link in the show notes or just visit elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Go to the events tab and you'll find the group cleanse, which starts September 18th. Or if that date doesn't suit you, the same cleanse can be done privately at any time throughout the year. And just go to the services tab on my website and go to programs and you'll find the private cleanse there. With the private cleanse, you get to choose your own dates. So check that out. Like I said, this cleanse has many benefits and it's something that we should be doing regularly for our body and mind. Okay, let's get back to the show. I think it would be good to talk about the Dhatus, and the order of the Dhatus is important because, like you said, you take the apple example, you eat an apple, it's broken down by the main Agni in the stomach and the small intestine into these parts. This, what I talked about in the other podcast episode that I'll link to in the show notes, number 92, is like this elemental juice, because Ayurveda talks about the 5 elements. So it breaks it down into this elemental juice, and then each Dhatu takes what it needs. But could you address the fact that there's an order to these Dhatus, and that, you know, it's important that each Dhatu Agni is working optimally so that it can pass on this elemental juice to the next Dhatu and so on. Can you address that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. There is an order, and there's an order and then like permutations and combinations. So the order is that you put food inside your stomach, and basically through your stomach acids and small intestine and the juices that get, you know, injected into your small intestines from your liver and pancreas and so on, that create what's called chyme, which is that elemental juice, which is a great way of, that's perfect name for it. That's your body is what's creating rasa, R-A-S-A. Rasa is that like basically nutritional juice that your body creates that feeds every other dhatu ultimately. So rasa comes first in the order of creation of dhatus. Then that rasa gets mixed in with rakta, and rakta is the first tissue rakta is blood. Rakta draws the nutrition from the rasa first before any other tissue. So, because without that blood, the blood is the great river of the body. So without that blood, nothing else is going to get nourished. Your body completely depends on the circulation of healthy blood tissue to nourish everything beyond blood tissue. So rakta is second. And then is mamsa, which we talked about as the basic component of muscle tissue, but also those membranes. So then mamsa gets nourished. So, all your linings and all the flesh in your body starts to take in nutrition from that rasa delivered via rakta into mamsa. And then from that mamsa, the fat tissue gets nourished. And then from that, the bone tissue gets nourished. And then the nerve tissue gets nourished. And then finally, last but not least, the reproductive tissue gets nourished.
Right.
And that is a basic order of how nutrition happens inside the body. And it's really important because if you are suffering from deficiency in rakta, let's say anemia, right? So you're not creating red blood cells properly and you have a low red blood cell count. And so that's one of your basic first tissues. That's going to create nutritional issues for every tissue coming after that.
Yes.
So most of your body.
Right.
And so you get these secondary imbalances when this primary tissue gets affected early on in the process of feeding the tissues. The other important thing about that is that when you have a tissue like, let's say one of the deeper tissues like reproductive tissue, nerve tissue, or bone tissue, it takes longer to heal those tissues than it would to correct rakta, for example.
Right.
Because it's a more subtle, it takes more energy for the body to deliver nutrition to those deep tissues than it does to get it in the bloodstream. So if you get someone coming in with, like, let's say a client comes in, they have anemia and hair loss. Okay, and so if they were to go to a Western physician, they would get some kind of prescription for the hair loss, and then they would get some kind of separate prescription for anemia.
Right.
But if you go into an Ayurvedic clinic, the Ayurvedic doctor or practitioner could say, hey, these two things are completely related. The issue you're having with your hair is related to your bone, and your bone tissue is not being nourished because it can't be nourished because the blood can't supply it properly. So the first thing we got to do is get your blood tissue back in order. Then we can really start working on the health of your bone tissue, and then your hair is going to grow back.
Right. Right, because it is a refining process, as you say, as it goes through each dhatu, and it takes 35 days for that digestion through to the dhatus, right? 35 days? 35 days. And then there's just to make things more complicated, there is another step. So at the end of all that, the end of nourishing all the dhatus, including shukra and artava, which are the reproductive dhatus, the last ones in order, which makes sense too, right? Because by the time your tissue becomes reproductive tissue, it is of the most refined quality. And then that's what you use to pass on your genetic coding. Exactly. The progeny. And that's great, right? You want to give your kids your best stuff. So that's why shukra's last in the order of things. But then even beyond that, so let's say your shukra or artava dhatu is completely nourished and your body is just fully brimming with nourishment. And you got some leftover energy, right? So your body then even takes the combination of all the dhatus, the dhatu agnis all come together and they create ojas. Right. And ojas is the fuel for your immune system, which of course is an extremely important topic, especially these days. Right. Right.
And when that ojas is strong, your immune system can ward off, and not just ward off. It's the immune system's not just about blocking out pathogens. The immune system's also about maintaining inflammation levels in your body. It's about regulating how much of certain types of bacteria you have in your body, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's extremely important.
Right.
So if you take someone who's immunocompromised, the hot word these days, it's largely because they have a depletion in one of the dhatus.
Mm.
And usually that's because one of the Dhatu Agnis or multiple Dhatu Agnis aren't functioning properly.
Yeah. Which is why, Ayurveda breaks it down and says if you have optimal Agni, if your digestive fires throughout your body are working optimally, then you will have good immunity.
Exactly. So immunity comes back to digestion.
Yeah.
And then the mother of digestion is that primary digestion in the stomach and small intestine. So that's always where we like to start in Ayurveda because, let's face it, probably over 80% of our population has digestive issues in the world these days. And so we always start with, hey, we got to work on your just basic intake of food. But after that's step 1, step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 through 13 is working on the other Dhatu Agnis.
Right, exactly. And then also, you were saying that it's not only the understanding that what we eat essentially becomes our tissues. What we put into our mouths, it's been broken down to this elemental juice and then feeding our tissues. So our quality of our tissues are dependent on the quality of the food we're eating, but also the environment we're in. Is it stressful? What we're taking in through our senses, because let's talk a little bit, Victor, about how rasa can be emotionally charged, that first tissue, depending on, our stress levels and our environment when we're eating.
Yeah, Agni is extremely sensitive to stress. If you look in Charaka Samhita, which is one of the ancient texts of Ayurveda, one of the causes of Dhatu Agni imbalance for the rasa Dhatu is emotional distress. Mm. So they list that out right there. So they say, if you're emotionally distressed, you're disturbing the production of rasa dhatu. Mm. And rasa dhatu, this is a good part to inject this little tidbit, which is a wonderful way of thinking about Ayurveda for those listeners who have been listening with you and understand Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. Mm. Where do those come from? Where does Kapha come from? Where does Pitta come from? And where does Vata come from? Kapha is the waste product of rasa. Mm. That's how you get Kapha in your body. So if everything's working great, then rasa produces the appropriate amount of Kapha in your body to function properly. But if rasa is deranged, like let's say that you're emotionally distressed, you're stressed out, so rasa dhatu gets disturbed. That's the first tissue, which means that you're getting impure rasa. So you put something in your stomach, and by the time it becomes chyme, so by the time it goes through your stomach and small intestine, and it becomes that elemental juice has impurities in it, which means undigested food, basically. Mm. And then that's going to affect the production and quality of the kapha in your body. And when kapha gets created and kapha is not of a high quality, it becomes ama. And ama is toxicity. That's how we would talk about it in our modern vernacular. Mm. So you start toxifying yourself. And then that toxicity gets carried into the bloodstream. And if the Rakta Agni is strong, it might help purify that a little bit on its way into the bloodstream. But if it's also weak, then you have these impurities running through your bloodstream and getting deposited into all your other tissues.
Right.
And if you get enough of that in the other tissues, it starts affecting their Dhatu Agnis, then they don't function properly anymore and you get a disease.
Yeah. And when we're talking about, emotional stress, this is not only, the stressors in your own life, in your relationships, in your job, but also taking into account if you're watching the news while you're eating, right? Because what you're eating while you're watching this stressful event, particularly nowadays with the news, that this food can be now emotionally charged, which means it's emotionally charging the rasa and then having an effect like you just talked about, Victor.
Yeah, it changes. So if we go back to elements, it changes the elemental composition of the food that has been initially digested. So when we digest food, our body, our prakriti, our constitution has certain demands for certain proportions of those elements, or I should say the qualities that those elements represent. So, I'll just use myself. I'm pretty primarily pitta. So my body wants more Agni. It wants more of the fire element, and uses that fire element more so than it will use the earth element, which belongs to Kapha. So, of course, my body's still creating the qualities of earth, like stability and strength and stuff like that for all its tissues, but it's all about proportions and distribution. So if I'm watching some stressful news event and that's spiking my vata, I'm aggravating vata by doing that, not just because of what I'm hearing, but because I'm looking at a screen for prolonged periods of time and my nervous system's getting agitated and there's a lot more movement inside my system than if I were just sitting calmly and quietly and eating, running through my nervous system mainly. Then that aggravates vata. So now my digestion is influenced by that vata, and what it will produce as an elemental juice is going to be higher in vata qualities than pitta qualities, but that's not what my body needs. My body needs a proper proportion, and I'm affecting that proportion by taking part in certain activities while I eat. So yes, it becomes charged with a quality that would imbalance my own personal constitution.
Right. So there has to be this holistic awareness of what's happening in our life. It can't just be the focus on what we're eating and the quality of the food we're eating, which is amazing. But you also have to look at what else in your life is affecting your Agnis, particularly now that we know this Agni is our life. It gives us our life energy. It sustains us. In Ayurveda, it says a person is as old as their Agni. It's a very important energy within the body, and it's the intelligence of the body and the fact that these Agnis appear not only in our main digestion of their stomach and the small intestine, but it goes down to a cellular level, right? Victor, it goes down to like the cell, the atom and the nucleus of each cell has an Agni, which is amazing.
Yes, each cell has an Agni. Every single one has an Agni. And that's what, in essence, makes it a cell, like kind of its own independent being. Or interdependent being, I should say. But yes, every single cell has an Agni. And if you can observe a cell, it's an amazing thing, because a cell will digest the little tiny particle that comes its way. Right. And it eats it, basically. I mean, it opens its cell wall, or it goes through the membrane, and then it goes into the nucleus of the cell, and it digests that and makes it part of itself to the point where when it has enough of itself, it can replicate and reproduce itself. So there you actually go through all the tissues, all the dhatus inside every single cell, from rasa all the way to shukra, which is reproductive. Right. So cells do that in their own way, and every cell has a little bit of a nuance, like, muscle cells are going to be different than fat cells, but basically they're going through the same process. And that whole process is governed by this primal force of Agni. We talked about the process or the order of nutrition earlier, but cells can demand, or different tissues can demand, different nutrition at different times. And that's where the beauty of the herbal world comes in, because certain herbs are able to skip part of that order and go directly to nourish a dhatu that needs help immediately.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's a lot where the medicinal factor of Ayurveda comes in. Is knowing what substance will skip over the middle three tissues and go straight to bone tissue.
Right. Right. And this is where, this Agni, this fire element, which is transformative, it's transforming everything into energy in the body. And it creates this awareness or this consciousness in each cell of the body.
Yes, so our consciousness awareness, intellect, all those things are governed by Agni. And that's meant to be taken literally in Ayurveda, in the sense that the very same force that determines how well you take in information, how well you process information, how illuminated your consciousness is, how aware you are, how perceptive you are, that very same energy is the energy that rules your physical digestion. And so they are inseparable. So if your digestion gets really impaired, and I'm not just talking about the first digestion, it could be the Dhatu Agnis later on. If that's severely impaired, your mental functioning is going to be severely impaired.
Right. And we can see now how important it is. Let's take it, we're talking on a micro level, our body. I want to take it now, Victor, on a deeper level, on a macro level, and what's happening in the world right now. So we can see, and I think most of us listening to this podcast are on this journey and understanding that the importance of keeping our Agnis performing optimally so that we can have this greater awareness and this greater consciousness of what's happening in the world right now. So I think it'll be interesting to take it there now and to talk about on the macro level what's happening in this world. And we're going through this Agni, this fire right now, big fires, right, of change and foundational changes and structures falling and this chaos. So I feel like we're going through this fire in the world, which is going to bring clarity, which we're transforming, but we're in the middle of it right now with everything that's going on. And I think at the other side, it's going to be a greater consciousness, but that's why it's so important to get this Ayurvedic wisdom out there for people to understand that it starts with our own internal fire and bringing our own internal Agnis into a place where they're functioning properly so that we can have this awareness and this consciousness of the bigger picture of what's happening in the world. And we know that on the other side, it's going to be good, but we just have to go through this fire of change because we've been living in the wrong way for far too long. Have I taken too much of a leap there?
No.
I've gone from micro to macro, but I do think
at all, because it's completely relevant. And it's so important to realize that when we're talking about Ayurveda and we're talking about the human body and we're talking about us, right? Because of course we're going to talk about ourselves, but that Agni exists in every living being in nature. And then you could even take it further and say, if you look at the global being as a whole,
right?
So that means, you look at the world or the earth as a self-contained system. I mean, it's like a body. Basically, it has all the doshas moving around at all times. You got vata moving around everywhere, making currents, and it all functions. And if you just take an ecosystem, it all basically stays pretty balanced. And if you take the world as a whole and you don't mess with it, it is this very balanced, regenerative whole.
Right. Self-sustaining. Yes.
Yeah. Self-sustaining, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so it's not too big of a leap, because when we don't separate ourselves from that, when we say that we're contributing to that whole, we're a part of that whole, then what we do affects the Agni of the whole.
Right.
And so if we run around burning a bunch of fossil fuels and eating the wrong things and, taking ourselves down, we're creating an Agni imbalance in the entire system. And then we see the results of that. You get ecosystems going haywire. They can't handle it. The Dhatu Agni of the entire whole is extremely disturbed. And so the consequence is the destruction of the function.
Right. Right. Because nature has this fine balance, just like our body does. And when there's an imbalance, it results in aggravation.
aggravation. And then then the immune system comes in to try and deal with that aggravation. And either it eliminates the aggravation or the system collapses.
Right, right. There's a lot of inflammation. There's a lot of rajas.
Yeah, and so our main issue right now is the Agni is too high.
Mm-hmm.
So the Agni is too high, meaning, the Amazon gets lit on fire and it just starts getting consumed. And, we're burning oil nonstop, fossil fuels, gasoline, right? Nonstop at extreme rates.
Mm-hmm.
That's all too much Agni in the system. And so when you have too much Agni inside our own body, it breaks down the tissue. Right. Agni will consume something. That's its nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't give Agni food, then it will start consuming tissue, Dhatus.
Right, exactly.
So that's what emaciation is.
Mm-hmm.
There's no food, there's no fuel for the Agni, so it just starts consuming tissues.
So
that's all it's got left.
Exactly. So what we're seeing as well on a macro level is a breakdown in Mother Nature.
Yeah, and so we could take a classic example of the ice caps.
Mm-hmm.
Ice caps are very kapha in nature, right? Earth and water.
Yeah.
And it's this big hunk of cold kapha.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all melting. And that is because the Agni has become too high, and now that heats up everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it starts consuming or breaking down kapha into its constituent parts.
Mm.
So you no longer have an ice cap that has all its functions and its habitat and all that stuff. It gets broken down into its constituent parts, the air and water and earth and all that stuff. It returns to its basic elemental form. And that creates a big problem for life as we know it. But if you want to even go more global, then you can say, well, it will change into something new. And it will, but that might not be the best situation for humans.
Right. Because now you have the loss of land masses with the rise.
Yeah, and let's not just say humans. Let's say all the species that were dependent on that.
Right. Exactly.
So then their Agnis get disturbed, and then they can't survive.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes on. And that all starts, I love how you said it, that all starts with our personal choices about our own Agni. Because if our own Agni is balanced, we will not disturb the Agni of the whole.
Right. The Agni nourishes our awareness, which is essentially a bridge to our consciousness. So then when we're in balance, our Agnis are working optimally. We understand that we are part of this whole, that we're all connected. We're part of Mother Nature. We're made up of the same elements as Mother Nature. And so we live sattvically, and we live in a manner that is inclusive and empathetic and compassionate to others, where now we're seeing that breaking down in some of our societies. And so I'm not saying this to be dramatic, but it's an understanding that it comes down to an individual level. And that the more we get this Ayurvedic wisdom out there and we get more people in balance on an individual level, that has a vibrating effect out. And that's how we make change.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can look at it in so many different forms. And, everyone has had the experience of having some kind of like epiphany or wake up moment or like sudden realization or inspiration. Mm-hmm. Ayurvedically speaking, that is the Agni opening up a channel inside. Mm-hmm. So that is a function of Agni, that sudden clarity, that all of a sudden that, that burst of light that we get inside. That's the Agni starting to function better. And so when someone starts dealing and healing on their Agni on a deep level, they start having more and more of those experiences, and the pieces start falling into place. For themselves, they have their own personal experience of that. It's not just listening to someone saying, hey, this is better, or this is worse, or, do this or don't do this. It goes so far beyond that. It gives someone the very crucial personal fuel to act on something that they themselves believe is the truth. Mm-hmm. And that is a function of Agni. And when you take it really deep into the psychological realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's essentially what our life purpose is to bring ourselves in balance so that we have a awareness of our true nature, bring that passion and our skill sets into the world. And that is what I believe is our purpose here, that we bring our self-care practices, make sure our Agni is working optimally so that we can connect to our true nature and bring our true nature into the world, speak our truth, use our skill set and bring that as a functioning part to this world.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better. It's what we need more than anything. It would help the world so much to balance our Agnis. And I think what people would find is that in the process of taking on the lifestyle of having a healthy Agni, a lot of the issues that are popping up in the world right now would fade away because they're symptoms of lifestyles that hurt ourselves.
Right.
So in being a bit selfish for our own health and doing it properly, we would actually end up healing a lot of the global issues.
Absolutely. And because we can become so overwhelmed with what's happening in the world right now on so many different levels, there's lots of things happening, but this is our awakening, right? This is our Mother Earth going, this has to stop. You cannot go forward just, with this mindset that it's all ours for the taking. We're not living in tune with nature. We're at the top of the pyramid, taking. And so I think it's a beautiful thing in Ayurveda that it does come down to the simplicity of your self-care is the priority. If you take care of yourself first, then your family, then your community. And again, that it's that vibrational pull out, because once you raise your energy and you're living sattvically, that energy vibrates out and it has an effect on others around you. They see that you're thriving. They see that you're in your truth, and there is this aura around you, and people are wondering what's going on there. I want some of that. And that's how it goes out into the world and it vibrates out. And I love that simplistic view that it starts with you and your self-care.
Yeah, it's true all the way through, and it makes perfect sense because we are nature. We're not separate. Our body, our entirety is made up. Our prakriti is made up entirely of the same thing everything else in this world is made up of.
Right. And just like we're not separate from each other either. We may live in different countries. We may have different skin colors. We may speak different languages, but we're essentially all made up of the same elements, just like the earth.
Just like the earth.
And I think that's a beautiful thing to understand, that if you start focusing on your health first, make your health a priority, make your Agnis functioning optimally in your body your priority, get yourself in a good place so that you can be there then to help others. And that may start with just helping your family and your children, and then your friends and your community. But that's how we will make change in the world. Because sometimes looking at it from the bigger, zooming out is just too overwhelming. And we're not all going to be, activists and so on. But we can start with ourselves, and that's where you can make the change.
Definitely. It's how, if you want to look at it in reverse, it's how the problem got started. Was a bunch of individuals throwing themselves out of balance, and then that cascaded.
Right.
So the solution is a bunch of individuals getting back in balance, and then that will cascade.
Right. Exactly. Because what we have right now is a lot of people who are more in the Rajasic mindset. It's a lot of greed and power and competition and, taking from Mother Nature and not thinking that, there's enough for everyone. So in order for me to succeed, I need to step on top of, be it other people, or I need to, overpower the animal kingdom or whatever it be. We need to have less of a pyramid structure and more of a working together.
A spiral structure.
Exactly. Yeah. Explain that a little bit more. I love that.
The pyramid versus spiral is a attitude of looking at the way nature works. Nature works like a spiral. And this was explained to me by my teacher that the mentality of the pyramid is that you have people lower on the pyramid, and basically they exist to support the person or people on top of the pyramid. And that's the attitude we're living in now. So you have these people on top accumulating all this wealth and power and whatnot. And the people at the bottom basically are there to filter up to the top, ensure their survival needs are met, and maybe a little bit more for people in the middle of the pyramid. But in essence, the function that they're serving is to get wealth to the people on the top. And that's a model that's got to disappear because that's a greed-based model. Mm-hmm. And one of my Ayurvedic teachers, Dr. Nandan Lele, who's in Pune, a wonderful, wonderful teacher and doctor, told me the story one day that the Ayurvedic story that the first disease is greed. That's the source of all disease, right, according to Ayurveda, the very first one.
Yes.
And so we have a whole model of society that's basically based on a disease model.
Yeah.
And switch that to a spiral model, the spiral representing these ascending circles where every individual is part of a curve. And no individual exists simply to support someone higher up on the spiral. Mm-hmm. They exist because they're their own, they're their own creation of the manifestation of the divine, if you want to use that kind of language.
Right.
And it's everyone, the spiral is constantly ascending, and everyone on making up the spiral is responsible for uplifting the entire spiral. So when that mental shift changes from you exist to give something to me versus we exist together to ascend together, which is represented by the spiral, then we'll be able to connect, we'll be able to relate, happiness will increase, which happiness has a direct effect on the Agni. Mm-hmm. Communities will form, and those communities will be uplifting, so on and so forth. And then that model will start to heal the damage we've done to the planet.
Love that. And it is that simple, that we all need to come to this realization that we are all connected. And until not only our brothers and sisters, but nature is thriving, that then we will have this wonderful, conscious world where everyone thrives. But while we're in this, I need to step on you in order to get up there to the top of the pyramid, that's not going to work anymore. So this is why we're going through this Agni, this overzealous Agni on the planet right now, because the world is not working for everybody. So we're going through this fire. But the more we all work on an individual level to improve our own personal Agnis, to create awareness and consciousness, then we can make the changes that we want to see in the world.
That is going to be a beautiful day. I don't know if it will happen in my lifetime, maybe a little bit far out, but it will happen one of these days.
It will. But we're all doing our work, We're working with Ayurveda. You out there listening, you're learning about Ayurveda. You're going to share it with your family and friends. And this is what we need to do, is get this wisdom of Ayurveda out there, because it breaks it down for us. And it helps us understand, yes, I'm not an activist. I have a family. I have a busy life. What can I do to help now? You can help by starting on your own health and wellness, getting yourself in alignment, your doshas pacified, your Agnis working optimally, efficiently, all your systems in your body healthy. And therefore you'll have the awareness and the consciousness to go out there and start spreading that word to others. So I think we all need to get to work on bringing ourselves into balance first, and our Agnis into balance, and from there spreading the word.
Yes, that would be extremely inspiring, and that is how the wisdom transfers.
Right, and we can all do that.
Yes, we can all do that. We all have that power. We all have that gift waiting inside, and we just need to open our palms and accept it. And if that means we have to drop some bad habits, then so be it.
Right, because essentially what this journey is going to do, it's going to prevent illness, it's going to give you longevity, it's going to give you clarity of mind, it's going to help you thrive in life and get that awareness of what your purpose here in this life, what is your skill set, where do you add value in the world. And we all know that the happiness comes when we are being of service and when we're contributing to the greater world at large.
Yes, that is, and that means we, just as like, since we're going to stick with the metaphor of Agni, if you take two fires and put them together, they very easily become one fire.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Victor, for this discussion today. We started with talking about Agnis in the body, and I'm glad we brought it out to the macro and talked about in the world, because I really want people, to understand that we can all make a difference in the world by starting with ourselves, and also to kind of understand in these times when it's so tough that there is a reason all this is happening, and how we can work away in our own lives to be part of the change.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, Victor, before we finish up here, can you tell us more about Pacific Coast Ayurveda and your offerings and where people can get in touch with you, please?
Yeah. Like you mentioned at the beginning, we're in Northern California, but of course, due to COVID, we are doing tons of online consultations, so on and so forth. So we're speaking to people all over the world. And you can reach me anytime at the clinic, which is 707-225-8844. That's our number. Or you can email me. And I think actually, Colette, you leave the contact information, right?
I don't need all that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what we actually are just starting up an official Ayurveda school.
Fantastic.
It's called the International Institute of Tantric and Vedic Sciences.
Wow.
And so, yeah, anyone interested in Ayurvedic or yogic education should definitely contact us. We're starting off a few programs. One of them is Ayurveda, the vagus nerve and addiction, and how to manage that. From an Ayurvedic perspective. And another course is a training course for Panchakarma technicians.
Oh, wait, great.
And then starting next September, a little ways away, but starting next September, we're actually going to do a full-on Ayurvedic practitioner program.
Oh, nice.
So it's going to be great. Myself, Dr. Madison Madden, who's also been on your show, our teacher, Guru Bai, and we have some Ayurvedic doctors in India who have offered to be teachers in the course for the school. So we're going to have a collection of wonderful people and teachers imparting this great wisdom. And so if you'd like to join us, please do.
Sounds amazing. Well, I'm going to put all those links in the show notes, so please go visit Victor's website there and you can find out more details. Victor, it's always a wonderful conversation with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. So thank you so much, and I really wish you well in your new endeavors. It's very exciting, and I look forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you so much, Colette. We'll talk soon.
Okay, take good care of yourself.
You too.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Briere, and please check out the show notes for all the links. If you think that this podcast episode would be interesting to family or friends, please share it with them. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast and perhaps rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. I would truly appreciate that. Don't forget, I have that group discounted seasonal cleanse coming up starting September 18th. It's an online cleanse that's tailored to you. Just click on the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. And for the group event, go to the events tab. If you want to do it privately, just go to the services tab and choose programs. Thanks again for tuning in. Take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slanga full.